November 18th, 1944. A grey, early winter drizzle crept across the British Forward Relief Station outside Aachen, turning the camp's dirt pathways into soft mud that clung to boots and dulled the sound of distant artillery. Morning light barely filtered through low clouds, casting everything in a washed-out pallor that made the world look colder than it already was. British soldiers moved between the tents with the routine fatigue of men who had been awake far too long, carrying crates, tightening ropes, stamping their feet for warmth. Nothing unusual had happened yet, nothing that hinted at the moment that would stop them all in place. A group of German women, 12 of them, were being marched toward the central processing tent. They were not soldiers in the strict sense. Some were auxiliary nurses with Red Cross armbands stained from weeks of service. Others were clerks, drivers, translators pulled from collapsing German units. Their uniforms were mismatched, some too large, some torn, some barely intact. They walked with arms wrapped around themselves, not for resistance, but simply to keep from shaking. And even from a distance, something about their posture was wrong. Their heads were down, their shoulders quivered. At first, the British soldiers thought the women were shivering from the cold, or perhaps afraid of what awaited them as prisoners. That was normal, expected. POWs cried sometimes, especially when the march had been long and the front lines were collapsing behind them. But the sound reaching the guards now wasn't the soft, trembling fear they were used to. It was sharper, raw, almost panicked. By the time the women reached the tent flap, Private Harold Whitmore paused mid-step, frowning as one of the Germans covered her face with both hands and let out a choked sob that sounded like she'd been holding it inside for hours. Another wiped her eyes repeatedly, even though the tears kept coming. A third, young, maybe 19, walked as if she could no longer feel the ground beneath her, whispering something through clenched teeth in broken bursts that none of the guards could make out. Sergeant Alec Turner, who had seen enough war to dismantle his sense of surprise, stepped forward. "Easy now," he said quietly, not unkindly. "You're safe. No one's going to hurt you." He gestured toward the tent. "Inside, we'll process you. Get you food and blankets." But the women didn't move. Instead, their crying intensified. The tallest of them, a blonde woman with a torn Luftwaffe auxiliary jacket, lifted her hands slowly as though terrified the motion itself might provoke punishment. The sleeves slipped down just enough for Turner to see the bruises on her wrists, dark, uneven marks that looked like they'd been made by rope or metal clamps. Not British, not American. Someone else's doing. Turner's brows pulled tight. "Who did that to you?" he asked. No answer. Only more tears. Private Whitmore turned to his friend, Lance Corporal Maddox. "They're terrified," he whispered. "More than normal. Something's off." Inside the tent, the camp's physician, Captain Rowan Hale, waited with a clipboard. Hale was a quiet, steady man, the sort who could stitch a bullet wound during artillery fire without trembling. But when the first woman stepped into the tent, he froze. Her hands were shaking violently, not from cold, but from something deeper, something like dread. She kept glancing at the floor as if expecting to be struck for entering without permission. Hale spoke gently, switching to slow German. "You're safe here. No one will harm you. Please, tell me your name." The woman swallowed hard, her lips quivering. "Anna," she whispered. "Anna Weiss." Her voice cracked on the last word, as if even saying her own name was a relief she hadn't known she needed. Hale gestured to the bench. "Sit. Breathe. There is no danger here." Anna shook her head slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks, dripping from her chin. "You don't understand," she whispered, barely audible. You haven't seen it." Hale knelt to her level. "Seen what?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she clutched the collar of her coat with trembling fingers. When she loosened it, the British officers finally understood why the women had been crying long before reaching the tent. Anna pulled the fabric aside, revealing her collarbone, thin as wire, protruding sharply against pale skin. Beneath the coat, she wore a uniform blouse so worn it looked translucent, and her ribs, every one of them, showed through as if carved. She wasn't simply thin. She was dangerously malnourished. Starved. The kind of starved that didn't happen overnight. Behind her, the other women were crying harder now, as though Anna's courage had broken something open inside all of them. Sergeant Turner's face went pale. "Good God!" Hale didn't speak at first. He simply rose, walked to the opening of the tent, and waved for the nearest British medic. "Get blankets, then water, then hot broth. Now!" Whitmore stepped into the tent, his boots dragging mud. The moment he crossed the threshold, the crying hit him like a physical force. Not just Anna. Every woman behind her was shaking, sobbing, clutching their coats as though trying to hold in their fear. One kept whispering, "Bitte nicht schlagen! Bitte nicht schlagen! Please don't hit! Please don't hit!" Whitmore swallowed hard. "Why would they think we'd—" He didn't finish. The words died in his throat. Turner answered quietly, "Because someone already has." As the inspection continued, the truth grew heavier. Nearly all the women were underweight, some dangerously so. Their ankles bore red marks from marching in ill-fitting boots. Their hands were cracked, swollen, the knuckles rubbed raw, as if they'd been forced to work in freezing conditions without gloves. Several had yellowing bruises along their arms and torsos, shapes that didn't match shrapnel or accidental falls. These were the marks of people who had been struck, repeatedly. And then came the detail that froze every British soldier who witnessed it. When Hale instructed one woman, Evelyn Radaman, to remove her coat for a full check, her eyes filled with terror. She slowly lifted the hem, revealing that her blouse had no buttons. They had been torn off, not recently, long ago. She had sewn the fabric closed herself with rough black thread. Her arms were so thin the sleeves hung like curtains. Turner looked at Hale, unable to hide his shock. "They weren't treated like auxiliaries," he murmured. "They were treated like—" Hale finished for him, voice low. "Prisoners. By their own side." At those words, the women broke openly. Every fear, every humiliation, every silent suffering they had carried poured out in ragged cries that filled the entire tent. The British soldiers exchanged looks they rarely used in war. Horror, anger, disbelief, pity so deep it almost felt like grief. Turner stepped outside briefly, needing the cold air. Maddox followed, his voice hushed. "They aren't crying because they're afraid of us," Maddox said. "They're crying because this is the first time they realize we're not going to treat them like that." Turner didn't answer. He stared at the ground, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Inside, Hale addressed the women again, switching between English and slow, careful German. "Listen to me," he said softly. "Whatever you endured before, it ends now. No one here will hurt you. You will be fed. You will rest. You will be treated with dignity. You are prisoners, yes, but prisoners under the Geneva Convention. That means protection, safety, respect." The women listened through tears, their breath trembling, as if they had never heard such a promise from anyone in uniform. Anna Weiss lifted her head, red-eyed and shaking. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for us?" Hale's answer was simple. "Because we're not your enemy anymore. The war might not be over, but your suffering here is." For the first time since their arrival, the crying changed. It softened. It loosened. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming, disorienting relief of discovering that the people they had feared most had become the first to show them compassion. Outside the tent, the drizzle continued, but the camp felt different now. British soldiers paused as the women were led to the warming station, wrapped in blankets, guided gently by medics who spoke softly and moved with patience. Turner watched them pass, every detail burning itself into memory. He knew they had only uncovered the surface of the story. Something far darker lay behind the bruises, the starvation, the terror in their eyes, something the women had not dared to speak yet. But they would. And when they finally told the British soldiers why they had been crying, the truth would shake the entire camp to its core. The rain deepened through the afternoon, settling into a steady drizzle that slicked the canvas roofs and filled the air with the cold, metallic smell of wet earth. Inside the British relief station, however, the atmosphere had shifted from routine to something almost reverent. Word had spread among the men, cooks, medics, guards, drivers, that the new German prisoners weren't what they expected. They were not defiant, not hostile, not even proud. They were broken in a way that made even battle-hardened soldiers lower their voices as they passed the tent where the women now rested under blankets. Private Whitmore brought steaming cups of weak British tea to Captain Hale's small medical enclosure, balancing the tin mugs carefully. When he entered, he found Hale kneeling beside one of the women, gently placing a stethoscope against her thin chest. She winced as cold metal met her skin. Hale glanced up. "Thank you, Whitmore. Set them down." Whitmore placed the mugs on a crate. His eyes drifted to the woman Hale was examining. She must have been mid-20s, though hunger had aged her face into sharp angles. Her eyes darted nervously toward every movement in the room. Whitmore cleared his throat. "How is she, sir?" Hale didn't answer immediately. He removed the stethoscope, exhaled through his nose, and gestured for the woman to pull her blanket up again. Then he stood. His voice was low. "They're all malnourished. Some dangerously so, but that's not the worst of it." Whitmore frowned. "What is the worst of it?" Hale hesitated. It was rare for him. "They weren't starved by lack of food," he said finally. "They were starved by order." Whitmore felt something cold ripple through him. "By the Germans?" Hale nodded. "Their own officers, their own commanders, their own camps." Silence settled heavily between them, broken only by the distant rumble of British lorries on the road. The woman Hale had examined, her name was Elsie Grunwald, watched the two men with the cautious stillness of someone who had spent months expecting cruelty at the slightest mistake. She whispered something in German, her voice barely more than a breath. Hale crouched beside her again. Langsam, bitter, slowly. Elsie swallowed, then tried again. "We were punished. All of us." Whitmore knelt too, keeping his hands visible, open, gentle. "Punished for what?" he asked softly. Elsie blinked rapidly as tears pooled. "For asking questions. For complaining. For being women." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she covered her face with both hands as her shoulders trembled. Hale didn't reach out to touch her, not wanting to startle her, but his voice softened. "You're safe now. Whatever happened, you can tell us." Through her fingers, Elsie whispered, "Not yet. Please, I can't." The moment she said it, the other German women, resting on cots around the tent, shifted uneasily. Some turned their faces to the wall. One pulled her blanket up to her chin as though trying to disappear. Their silence wasn't reluctance, it was trauma. Hale rose and motioned for Whitmore to follow him outside. Rain pattered on the tent canvas overhead. "They'll tell us eventually," Hale murmured, "but it won't come quickly. Whatever they lived through was—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. In the mess area, Sergeant Turner and Corporal Maddox sat together over tin bowls of stew, though both had barely touched their food. When Whitmore joined them, Turner looked up with a grim expression. "Doc says the women were punished on purpose," Whitmore said quietly. "Starved. Not by accident." Maddox set his spoon down. "Something I don't understand," he said. "Who treats their own auxiliaries like that? Nurses, clerks, drivers. These weren't frontline troops." Turner's gaze flicked toward the medical tent. "Desperation," he muttered. "Discipline. Fear. The Reich was falling. Maybe someone wanted to tighten control. Maybe someone wanted to break them." Whitmore bristled. "Break them for what? For doing their jobs?" Turner sighed. "War makes monsters out of men, Whitmore." Whitmore shook his head. "No. There's something more. Something they haven't told us yet." Before Turner could answer, the flap of the mess tent opened and a tall German woman entered under guard. She was wrapped in a blanket, her blonde hair plastered to her face from the rain. Her hands clutched the blanket tightly. It was Anna Weiss, the first woman they had spoken to. One of the British guards approached Turner. "Sergeant, she asked for you. Says she wants to talk." Turner stood. "Let her sit." Anna lowered herself onto the bench opposite him. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around the mug of hot water the guard offered. She didn't drink, couldn't. Her eyes were glassy, swollen from crying. Turner kept his voice gentle. "You asked for me." Anna nodded slowly. We cannot stay silent. You deserve to know why we cried." Maddox leaned forward slightly. Whitmore held his breath. Anna's fingers tightened on the mug. 3 weeks ago, she began, our unit, our entire auxiliary group, was ordered to move from one camp to another. We were told it was for reassignment." Her voice softened to a tremble. "It was not." Turner didn't speak. He knew not to interrupt. Anna swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. "We were taken to a holding camp, not like yours. Ours was run by men who believed we were worthless, a drain, a nuisance. They said women had no place in war unless we were silent and obedient." Whitmore felt his stomach knot. "What did they do to you?" he asked carefully. Anna shut her eyes as fresh tears escaped. Her voice was barely audible. "They locked us in a storage barracks for 2 days. No food, no water. They said we would earn it back by proving our loyalty." Maddox's jaw clenched. "They made us stand outside in the cold for hours," Anna continued, her hands shaking uncontrollably now. "Anyone who collapsed was kicked. Anyone who cried was hit. They told us that if we ran, they would shoot us and call it desertion." Her breath broke, and she trembled violently. Whitmore had to avert his eyes, the rage rising in his chest almost unbearable. Turner forced his voice to remain steady. "And the starvation?" Anna nodded miserably. 3 days, no rations. They said the food was for the real soldiers." She inhaled sharply. "One girl fainted. They left her lying in the mud until nightfall. They did not let us help her." Whitmore whispered something under his breath. Maddox stared at the table as if trying not to explode. "And the bruises?" Turner asked quietly. Anna's lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. "Punishments. For looking the wrong way. For speaking without permission. For asking when we would be fed." She lowered her head into her hands and cried harder. "But the worst," she whispered. "The worst was not the starvation, or the beatings, or the marching." Turner leaned forward, his voice a low anchor. "Then what was it?" Anna lifted her face slowly, and for the first time, the British soldiers saw not fear, but shame. Deep, devastating shame. "They took something from us," she said. "Something we cannot get back. Something that made us cry before we even reached your camp." She paused, breath shaking. "They took our dignity." She broke completely then, silent, shaking sobs that ripped through her exhausted body. And though the British soldiers didn't yet know the full meaning of her words, they felt the weight of them like a stone. Turner placed his hand on the table between them, not touching her, but close enough that she saw she wasn't alone. Whitmore stood frozen, fury burning through him. Maddox exhaled slowly, eyes wet. Anna's voice barely rose above a whisper. "We cried because we thought you would do the same. Because we believed every uniform brought suffering. Because we did not know compassion still existed." Whitmore swallowed hard. "Anna, what exactly did they do? What happened to you?" Anna squeezed her eyes shut. "I will tell you, all of it, but not yet. Please, let the others rest first." Turner nodded. "We'll wait, and when you're ready, we'll listen." Rain drummed softly on the canvas above them. But inside the tent, the world felt charged, quiet, heavy, waiting. Because the British soldiers now understood one thing: whatever they had learned so far was only the beginning. And the truth, the reason the German women had cried long before reaching the British camp, was darker than anything they had imagined. Night settled slowly over the British relief station, turning the faint drizzle into a thin mist that drifted across the camp like smoke. Lamps flickered in the darkness, their glow pooling against the wet ground and casting long, wavering shadows along the canvas tents. Most of the soldiers had turned in for the evening, but inside the medical enclosure, a soft murmur of voices continued, low, careful, respectful. The German women were finally warm, fed, and blanketed, but none of them slept deeply. Their breathing came in light, uneven rhythms, the bodies of people who had forgotten what safety felt like. Captain Hale sat at a small wooden table, taking notes in the dim glow of a lantern. He didn't write details yet. He wrote impressions, words like fear, tremor, severe deprivation, systemic punishment. He paused only when the flap of the tent shifted and a silhouette entered. It was Anna Weiss again. She stepped inside quietly, her blanket draped around her shoulders. Hale rose. "You should be resting," he said gently. Anna shook her head. Her eyes held a clarity now, fragile, but resolute. "I said I would tell you, and I must, before the others wake, before I lose the strength." Hale nodded, motioning toward a chair. A moment later, Whitmore and Turner arrived as well. Word had reached them that Anna wished to continue. Anna folded her hands in her lap. "There is something you still do not understand," she began. "Something that explains why we were crying before we even reached your station." Turner met her gaze with steady calm. "We'll listen, whatever it is." Anna took a slow breath. After 3 days without food, they lined us up in the courtyard. 47 women, all of us dirty, exhausted, starving. The commander, the Hauptmann. He walked up and down the line. She paused as though replaying the scene behind her eyes. He said we were not loyal enough, that women in wartime were useful only if silent, only if obedient, only if empty of weakness. Whitmore felt a sharp, sickening twist in his chest. Anna continued. "He told us that if we wanted our rations back, we had to prove we were worthy of being auxiliaries. He said we had to show we were tougher than Allied women, more disciplined, more pure." Turner's voice dropped. "What did he make you do?" Anna swallowed. "He ordered us to remove our coats." The tent air seemed to stop moving. "We refused," Anna whispered. "Every one of us." So the guards stepped forward. They pulled the coats away, some by force. We stood in the cold for hours, in only our thin clothes, shivering, crying, begging them to stop. That was the first humiliation. Her breathing quickened, but she pressed on. "Then he made us raise our hands," she said. "Above our heads, all of us, for hours. Anyone whose arms dropped was struck." Hale closed his eyes briefly, jaw tight. "My arms felt like they were tearing apart," Anna said. "One woman, Merle, collapsed. They dragged her aside and left her there." Turner exhaled through his nose. "That's why some of you flinched when we asked to see your hands." Anna nodded. "Yes. We thought you were going to check if we would obey. We thought you were going to do what they did." Her voice broke, but she wasn't finished. "Then came the final part," she whispered. "The part we cannot forget." The British soldiers leaned in, the lantern light trembling softly between them. Anna's eyes filled with tears that clung to her lashes before falling. He brought out a crate. Inside were our personal papers, letters, photographs, keepsakes from home. Things we carried through the entire war. She paused, her hands trembling. "He made us watch as the guards burned them." Whitmore's breath caught. "They burned your personal things. All of them," Anna whispered. "Everything. Letters from mothers, childhood photographs, documents proving we had families waiting for us. They told us we were nothing now, that our past was gone, that the Reich owned us entirely." Her voice wavered. "The crying began there," she said. "Not from hunger, not from pain, but from losing the last pieces of who we were." Silence fell so heavy it felt like a weight pressing on the chest. Turner spoke first. his voice thick with restrained anger. They tried to erase you. Anna looked up slowly. Yes, and we believed they had. When we saw your uniforms, we thought you might do the same, that all soldiers were the same, that uniforms meant cruelty. Whitmore's throat tightened. But when you arrived, Anna wiped her cheeks. You offered blankets, water, food. You looked us in the eye. No shouting, no threats, no raised hands. It was the first kindness we had seen in months, and it broke us. Turner leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You cried, he said quietly, because it was the first time someone didn't hurt you. Anna nodded, the motion small, fragile. Yes, we cried because we realized we were safe for the first time in a very long time. Hale sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. You're safe here, he repeated. You're protected under our command, under our laws. No one will treat you as they did. Anna's face collapsed in relief, a soft, silent sob shaking her shoulders. Turner handed her a clean cloth, careful not to touch her directly. She accepted it with trembling hands. Outside, the mist grew thicker, cloaking the camp in a muted hush. The British soldiers escorted Anna back to her cot, where the other women stirred faintly as she settled beside them. A few opened their eyes, searching for her expression. When they saw the faintest hint of peace on her face, small, barely formed, but real, they relaxed into their blankets, hope beginning to seep into their exhausted bodies like warmth. Later that night, Turner stood outside the medical tent with Maddox and Whitmore. None of them spoke for a long time. The cold nipped at their fingers, but none moved to leave. Finally, Whitmore broke the silence. I didn't think, he murmured, that after everything we've seen in this war, something could still shock me like that. Turner nodded. They weren't just prisoners. They were victims of their own system. He let out a slow breath. We'll make sure they recover. Every last one of them. Maddox glanced toward the dimly lit tent. Do you think they'll ever forget it? Turner shook his head gently. No, but they'll remember this place too. And maybe that's enough to begin again. Inside the tent, Anna lay awake for a long time, listening to the soft, steady breathing of the other women. For the first time in months, fear didn't hollow her chest. The night didn't feel like a threat. And when she finally closed her eyes, a thought came to her, a thought she had not dared believe until now. They had cried because of what had been done to them, but now here they cried because for the first time someone saw them, and someone cared. And that changed everything.